Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guests are Dr. Geoff Dabelko and Dr. Holly Dabelko-Schoeny. Geoff is a professor at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs at Ohio University and senior advisor to the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. Holly is an associate professor at the College of Social Work at Ohio State University and director of research for the Age-Friendly Innovation Center. She is a community-engaged researcher working to improve the quality of life for older adults and those who care for them through community-based interventions. The two of them have co-founded the group, the Gray-Green Alliance. Holly and Geoff will explain why older adults are consistently identified as a vulnerable group to the impacts of climate change. The increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events pose a range of direct and indirect threats and opportunities for our aging world. The Gray-Green Alliance is working to make age-friendly communities more climate resilient and emergency prepared. Hey, Geoff and Holly, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doug, thanks so much.
Hello.
All right, well, welcome. And Geoff, you're returning, so we're old friends. But Holly, you're new to it, so welcome to Simpatico. And it's first brother-sister conversation that I've had, so I'm very excited about this. But we're gonna just learn a little bit about that history there. But I just want to start off, and Holly, I'm going to start off with you. What is the Gray-Green Alliance?
Yeah. So the Gray-Green Alliance is the recognition of the importance of the connection between age-friendly communities and being climate smart. So it's bringing together thought leaders and practitioners to provide the climate lens on age-friendly issues and the age-friendly lens to issues of climate. It is a partnership between Ohio University and Ohio State University. So the Gray-Green is both a play off from older adults and the environment, but also our colors as Bobcats green and Buckeyes gray and red. So pleased to be able to be here and talk about it. Geoff, do you have other pieces you want to add?
No, that's great. Great introduction, Holly.
Well, okay, and I didn't know that about the colors. I guess I knew my Ohio State colors somewhat, but that's kind of fun too. But you're probably looking to expand the scope of what you're doing just outside of Ohio too. But Geoff, let's just jump in there. Your siblings, and how did this get started? Where did these conversations start that you two thought you could work together on this? Two very separate topics, but I'm sure you figured out pretty quickly there's going to be a lot of overlap with what you're doing.
Well, we didn't figure it out quickly, and maybe we're just slow learners, but we both researchers and applied researchers and engaged. Holly really focused on Ohio and Columbus, and me focused internationally. So we thought by in part the different geographies, but in part the different topics of sustainability and climate, foreign policy and on my side, and older adults and aging on hers. And so we kind of just casually thought that it was kind of too bad that we didn't have the opportunity. Then we started really getting into understanding a little bit more about the challenges that were faced and started to see overlaps in what she's talking about. Holly's talking about the age-friendly methodology from the World Health Organization and from AARP here in the United States. It was focused on transportation and having accessible public transportation in particular. It was focused on health issues from a variety of areas, infrastructure, community inclusion and participation. And I was like, well, these are the same things that we're really focusing on in the climate adaptation agenda and the sustainability agenda. And so maybe we have some opportunities to find where there are overlaps or frankly synergies is our hope, and that synergies on the risk and the threat side, but also on the possibilities of moving forward, sometimes coming to it from the climate side, but also coming to it from the age-friendly and older adult side, and where climate doesn't have to be the lead, but can achieve some of the objectives that we're looking to do on climate adaptation, but through that age-friendly lens.
Okay, Holly, give us a little bit more background. This whole notion of is a community age-friendly? It might seem intuitive, but what really is that? It's a whole discipline that you're studying, but what is that?
Right. So it is a formalized network. So in 2006, the World Health Organization recognized our aging world, that we're doubling the number of older adults in our communities. And they established a network of age-friendly cities and communities that recognize the importance of providing inclusive, accessible, social environments, built environments, and service environments. And AARP is the United States affiliate with the World Health Organization around this work. And the various domains, Geoff mentioned a few, of housing, transportation, communication, employment, social inclusion, volunteerism, a whole host of domains that are important to create communities that are inclusive and places where you can be healthy. In fact, across the world, there are over 1,000 communities that are part of this network. And in the United States, there are about 500 communities in the network. And what that means is the highest elected official in that community has agreed to a 5-year cycle of continuous improvement to make their community more livable for people of all ages. So starting with a assessment, then a strategic plan, and then 3 years of implementation where the elder voices, the older adult voices, are front and center in identifying what are the challenges and opportunities and what can we do about them.
You know, I grew up in Florida. There are a lot of older adults there, and now I'm in Tucson, Arizona. A lot of snowbirds. So I've been living in areas where, but I guess I didn't realize that there was these formal sort of networks to help with those communities. And Geoff, you know, pivoting to you, this notion of doing what Holly does, but bringing climate adaptation. It's like, where do you even start?
Right. Well, we started by looking at those domains from Age Friendly. That was a really powerful network. It's all around the world. And it was essentially silent on questions of climate from a mitigation, from adaptation, from a resilience perspective. And so our shorthand for this is aging in a warming world. And what does that mean across all these domains in ways that are kind of clearly connect to infrastructure and housing and inclusion and health, communications, but also we've added it literally as an additional domain. So the age-friendly methodology allows communities to decide that they want to have additional areas of focus under their age-friendly process. So one of the innovations, by learning from Holly and her colleagues in Columbus and at Ohio State, we here in a very different setting, in a rural setting in southeastern Ohio, have become an age-friendly county, age-friendly Athens County. And in addition to the standard domains, we've added a sustainability and climate resilience domain because we see it as a critical step to, if we're going to actually have meet the objectives of those other domains, we have to have this frame integrated across them, but also as a standalone looking for threats and for opportunities.
So Holly, just as it was explained, there's really not a lot of previous work in this area, and just not sure if you've come across, but let's say you're a wildlife agency or you're a city, one of the first things you do is you create an adaptation plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the right approach, but it's been sort of this default approach. Have you encountered, even just if the World Health Organization, are there any adaptations plans out there at all that really just are focusing on older adults?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And in fact, that was one of the first steps that one of Jeffrey's students took in this effort around the Gray-Green Alliance. Melissa Dabelko, who worked on this with us and actually is a founding member of the Gray-Green Alliance. She started by reviewing these adaptation plans and looking at what would happen, what are the conversations around older adults. And what we found really is that there's sort of peripheral acknowledgement of older adults as a vulnerable population. But the folks who are putting together these plans and having these conversations may not have expertise in gerontology and the experience of aging. And so there could be a lack of knowledge about some of the unique issues that individuals who are aging may face. And so one of the key components of our work has been to create partnerships and better alignment with, here in our community, folks like the Red Cross and others who have been involved with emergency responses. For instance, we recently were engaged with a older adult or affordable housing high rise that lost their electricity. And Katie White, the director of our center, was able to go down and have conversations about what this might really mean for older people in terms of their inability to have transportation to get to a cooling center if needed. What happens if they have medications that need to be refrigerated? How about if they're using an oxygen concentrator that needs to be plugged in and only has limited battery life? And so some of those realities of aging, things that are disease focused, but also natural parts of aging. We don't recognize our body is hot as well as we age. We don't have a sense of thirst like we do when we're younger. We don't sweat as effectively. We tend to cover our bodies more, and so we may overdress. So there are a number of issues that really bringing together experts in adaptation and preparedness and climate, coming together with gerontologists, experts in aging, can really help. And then what we really think about are those experience experts. So instead of just scientists, bringing together social scientists from a climate lens and an older adult lens, let's talk to the older adults themselves and hear about what their experiences are in trying to get to a cooling center, for instance, or what are their needs. So identifying their opportunities, solutions, and engaging with them. We really believe with the Gray-Green Alliance that the true answers lie within that intersect between the scientists and those with lived experience.
So Geoff, so the focus right now too is just in your community of Athens, but then there's Columbus, Ohio, and I'm just curious, your area of expertise, this national security, internet, China, Russia, and these are all these big topics around climate change. What's it been like for you to think about climate change in these two very different areas at a very micro scale level?
Mm-hmm. Well, so for example, one of the places I learned the most about climate change was participating and trying to contribute my piece on the security side to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. When in the last assessment, we had a human security chapter and looked at those issues. And through that process, I had the opportunity to really focus on who and where are those vulnerable communities. And so through that, older adults are regularly included in reports like IPCC and where we had these intersections with security. But then to go farther and say, and so therefore these different interventions and there's responses. So in some respects, it is quite different than that kind of state to state set of conversations. But much of that now national security and human security perspective on climate change is about bringing it down to specific places and specific communities. And so that's really what this frame and this collaboration with Age Friendly was exciting to me, because it is an international effort with countries all over the world participating, Australia, Denmark, Japan, and those are kind of where we see kind of traditional notions of aging communities and older communities where a greater percentage of the population are older. But this is becoming an issue in all countries of the world. And so it's one where, as Holly has told me before, she'll never be out of work because there are lots of older adults and there are more and more every day. And so it's a topic that gives us opportunity to plug in all around the world as we try to really see what this means on the ground in these different contexts.
I think if we can get older adults taking climate adaptation seriously, we'll finally make some headway because they're so influential in society. All right, I got a question from Ken in the chat room here, and I was going to do a variation of this question. Ken, thanks for this. And I think both of you should take a crack at this. Maybe Holly, you first. The recent heat waves in the Pacific Northwest have been demonstrating how vulnerable older adults are to urban heat. It seems like the AARP could do a lot to enhance public education about this issue. Did they weigh in on this heat wave event? And Polly?
Yeah, so certainly climate has been recognized by AARP as an issue that is critical to the health and well-being of all people, and certainly in particular older adults. I think there is conversation about their engagement, and this is really, I think, an opportunity, and this age-friendly framework, I think, provides a really nice opportunity to help make some of those connections in a real meaningful way. So not only through AARP, which they are the lead in our country around this network, and exploring the integration of these issues around creating livable communities for all, but also looking at active advocacy groups that are made up of elders themselves. There are national organizations that of older adults who have come together and organized. And here's the thing: if we plan and act in a way that is age friendly, it's going to help people of all ages. So if we're talking about adaptation, if we're talking about mitigation, or whatever we're talking about, if we bring an aging lens to the table, that's going to serve everyone. And so as we think about various advocacy organizations, as well as our own direct conversations with policymakers, I think sometimes we think about older adults as this sort of separate, homogenous group of individuals. And instead of looking at how all those older folks are connected to families and young people, most of them do not live in institutions. So we hear these extreme heat events, these other weather events, and we hear COVID. We hear about nursing homes and institutionalization. And certainly those places are critical, are important, and hold some of our most vulnerable folks. But the reality is only 5% of older adults at any one time are living in a nursing home or some type of institutional setting. So the majority of them are out in community. And so those are the populations that organizations like AARP and others represent. And so I think both on the climate side and the aging side, we have to kind of break down some of our assumptions about one another, get out of our silos, and really think in those terms. How can we enhance one another's work together?
And Geoff, any thoughts? It's a pretty dramatic event in the Pacific Northwest. What stood out for you in regards to what you're doing here?
Yeah, well, it certainly it makes headlines that are important and tragic, but dramatically make clear that the future is likely not like the past. And so it's not that communities don't have emergency preparedness, but part of what we're trying to do with the resources we're providing to communities, both urban and rural, is say, how do we need to change them? How do we have to question our assumptions where what it meant for previous storm experiences and preparing for the future? Clearly, the temperatures we saw in the Pacific Northwest were outside the bounds of what had been planned for. And so this new normal, with much greater variability, much greater extremes, is one that, in order to be resilient or livable or age-friendly, whatever we want to call it, that we have to take that into account. And I do think, frankly, I know you've been very helpful, Doug, in getting the conversations with your guests previously to include the kind of dramatic dimensions of this crisis, but also not just make it crisis, but understand that we have to have considered and long-term approaches and not just respond to the most immediate manifestation. And so I think, for example, in a rural part of southeastern Ohio, if we can engage with people and talk about how they'll be safer and maybe actually save some money if they do household level adaptations that could even have mitigation benefits, right? So household solar, that gets them off the grid where they're having unreliable electricity when they really need to have it. It's now becoming something that in a relatively short term, they get a return and actually are saving money. Starting with that, rather than the climate frame, is going to get you into more households and more conversations around the kitchen table. And so when I'm learning from mayors of villages here in southeastern Ohio, that's their advice as to how to be both age-friendly and climate smarter. And so that is, I think, a way for us to understand not just the kind of moral power and voice of that experience, not just the advocacy benefits, but the opportunity to have conversations with hopefully a wider set of people, because these are affecting everyone.
Okay, so we just have time for a couple more questions, but Holly, I'm just wondering if this was really on your radar. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've learned a ton about condo associations, the Surfside tragedy in Florida. And it occurs to me, like, what you're doing, I didn't realize these condo associations had so much power, so much influence. And I'm just wondering, I almost see there's an opportunity for education and because tapping into existing networks is never quite easy to do. These associations are networks, they represent certain things. And so if you think of the bigger picture around climate change and coastal issues, has that ever been on your radar, condo associations?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly residents associations are groups that we, as social work researchers, partner with all the time. And so, it doesn't matter if you have a evidence-based intervention that is going to make a big difference in a particular area. If you cannot successfully engage with the individuals who need to actually implement that intervention. So thinking about various residents associations are folks that we work with frequently. In fact, here in Columbus, we recently were engaged with a project in affordable housing properties, senior affordable housing properties, where we provided Wi-Fi hotspots, tablets, and training to help address the issue of the digital divide. As you know, during the epidemic, we became increasingly reliant on platforms such as this, video conferencing and other types of video streaming for all kinds of things, from e-health interventions, or just keeping informed about what's going on. And so those condo associations, residents associations are great partners to really find that nexus, that connection between what evidence we have that we know this or that will make a difference, to implementing those various types of interventions, as well as seeking their expertise and knowledge about what is it that they want, what is it do they really need. So that education both ways is really critical. And certainly Surfside would be another example of those types of conversations could be really helpful.
All right, so we have to wrap this up. Geoff, I guess want to end it with you, and Holly, of course, weigh in afterwards too, but just if people want to learn more about what you're doing, maybe there's some partnership opportunities, hopefully we're using this interview to kind of get the word out, what would you recommend they do?
Well, they can to get in touch with the two of us, and we'll make the connections to the partners in the network, and in some respects that is members of the city council and mayors and kind of practitioners on the ground. It's the older adult experts, and it is the kind of critical thought leadership like AARP, which is kind of taking the first steps and really recognizing climate change as a risk for older adults. But I think as some of the examples we've talked about, there's some real possibilities for synergies and kind of both a case for and ways to make communities more age-friendly and more livable by understanding that we are living in a warming world and the future is not going to be like the past. And so just like the folks on the climate side need to better understand what it is to be an older adult and the areas of gerontology, so too do we have to have that learning in reverse? And so we look forward to all folks who'd like to learn more and kind of go on this shared learning experience that we're in the midst of ourselves.
And Holly, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I think that in order for our world to be livable for people of all ages, it has to be age friendly and climate smarter. So we need to roll up our sleeves and learn together and figure this out together.
Great. Well, it was a treat chatting with you. We have a couple more questions in the chat room I want to get to. We're going to take you into just chatting. It's our way of closing out the episode. I want to get to those questions, but I did want to close out this episode. And, really exciting what you're doing. I think there's going to be a huge demand for what you're doing. And I wish you luck. And thanks for coming on Simpatico.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, just hold on. We're going to go into just chatting.